It's Mark and Pete.
Hello and welcome to the show. More colourful conversations with Mark and Pete. Now, this is the show dedicated to religion, politics and business. Each week, clergyman Pete and businessman Mark will debate an important topic. On this week's show, we debate the bitter-sweet taste of tax. When we look at our society, we all feel as though we're taxed on almost everything, wherever we move, on our income, on the goods that we buy. But what is being considered is actually a tax on sugar. Yes, that's right, a tax on sugar. Well, the UK government has been put under enormous pressure to consider this when you look at the statistics which shows that child obesity is increasing. Also, adult obesity too. And this is perceived to be putting enormous strain, of course, not only on their bellies, but of course the NHS, that's the National Health Service. So what do we need to do here? Is it right that we actually put tax on products? Or should we actually be just putting more emphasis on better awareness and actually living a better lifestyle? Well, I'm going to set up the scene first with a little poem, and then we'll get clergyman Pete's view on this. This is called Bittersweet Tax. Is sugar tax worth its salt? Is child obesity the parents' fault? Are fast foods piling on the calories? Are the retailers enjoying bloated salaries? Has life just become far too sweet? Has the government prepared a lovely treat? Can the Chancellor have his pound of flesh? Can every ounce of profit come from the creche? Have we become a nation of fatty scoffers? Have we jammed up the treasury coffers? Does the weight of tax prompt ifs and maybes? Or do we continue producing a generation of jelly babies? Well, with me today is clergyman Pete. I see that you're munching through your jelly babies there. Now, is it right, actually, that we should even consider putting more levy on sugar?
Well, businessman Mark. Oh, do you want one, by the way? The thing about sugar is adding sugar in actually pretty large quantities to food has become commonplace in the diets that we enjoy here in Western society. So it does seem to me, just at the outset, I'll just say, it does seem to me that something needs to be done. We need to reduce, as a society, our intake of added sugar if we're going to have a greater amount of people whose fitness is acceptable for, just normal activity throughout their life. And also if the number of obese and overweight people is going to be brought down significantly, I think something has to be done. I suppose the question is whether taxation is the right route.
Well, indeed. And in fact, the UK government seem to be doing what they call a flip-flop and debating over whether this is a good thing or not. If you think of the implications of putting tax on sugar, it affects not just a bag of sugar, but of course the products that we buy. So, for example, whether that's soft drinks. Remarkably, some very well-known soft drinks contain astronomical amounts of sugar, but also things like cakes and biscuits. But of course, ironically, even milk products. So this will be an issue. And of course, alcohol is another factor. There's a lot of sugar in alcohol. Yes. And adults, of course, are equally guilty of piling on the pounds. But as we look at this and think, well, wait a minute, where does it end? Is it just simply that the government is thinking another way of exploiting the members of the public and thinking, this is another way to make more money? Or is it really a genuine concern that people's health is suffering. Now, I can tell you that a lot of good and famous lobbyists. So, for example, there's a TV chef here in the United Kingdom called Jamie Oliver, and has done a lot of good campaigning to explain why it is that having a sugar tax is going to help cut down child obesity. He believes that having a good diet both at breakfast and, of course, afternoon meal and, of course, evening meal is going to significantly reduce those people piling on the pounds. But whilst he's obviously only one champion of the cause, also a lot of doctors feel that this is a good thing as well. But I guess the question is, how on earth are we going to actually implement this? Any thoughts how the government might even start to tax people?
Well,
how would they go about doing it?
Well, I mean, taxation on alcohol is already well in place. Taxation on cigarettes, all forms of tobacco in different rates is already in place. So it's certainly feasible to simply tax purchase of foods with or drinks with a large amount of sugar at the point of sale. So that's certainly possible to do, but there's a couple of problems with it. One is, I guess more research needs to be done, but at what level would increasing the price of for example, a can of your favourite soda pop, at what point would you think, well, I'm not going to buy it then? How high does the tax need to be to change people's habits of drinking sugary drinks? And then the second thing is to say that when we talk about a change in the tax laws, I think it's very rare to find a government suggesting that we reduce the tax, or that a tax is going to be, or maybe reduced slightly, but certainly not removed altogether. So once you've introduced a tax on a type of food or drink, is this the start of a slippery slope? Putting tax on food and drink, is that a route that we really don't want to go down? Because it'd be a temptation for governments to then start to tax other food and drink.
Well, there's something that springs to mind immediately, because when we talk about sugar, we need to qualify that we're talking about the too much sugar and saturated fat and too little of the good stuff. So, for example, there's good sugars in fibre, fruit and vegetables and oily fish, etc. Sure, yeah. So the idea that there's a campaign actually in the United Kingdom, which is your 5 a day, the idea being that if you have a balanced meal, you have 5 fruits and vegetables, that is something that's going to help you to lead a more healthy life. But to your point, what happens if we start saying, well, maybe a tax on salt? Yes. Now, of course, there is the criticism, of course, although we've talked about sugar, that there is too much salt in our diet. So children and indeed adults are eating far too many crisps, for example, or maybe other products that just contain far too much salt. Now, this is going, if you think about it, sugar and salt is virtually in almost every manufactured product that we make. So how do you actually monitor that? Because even though an individual item may contain what we perceive to be reasonable levels of sugar or salt, it doesn't stop people gorging themselves on numerous amounts of those individual products. Surely it's more around educating the public and managing your diet better, and I think you mentioned as well, having a healthier lifestyle, doing exercise, get off your backside and do something.
Yes, this is an example. If we look at how the food industry has got in the position of producing such high-level sugar in drinks, it's an example of companies losing sight of what they're actually producing. They're losing sight of the aim of the company to provide food. In fact, in suggesting that you levy a tax on sugary drinks, there's that David Haslam, Professor David Haslam, who's from the National Obesity Forum. He is very much in favour of having a 50% tax on sugary drinks to disincentivize people to buy them. But says this. I've got a quote from him here. He says, "We don't currently support taxing food products, but sugary drinks have no place in anyone's diet." So he's saying, don't tax food products, but this isn't actually a food because it's so dangerous.
Yes.
Now, that being the case, there might be another way to approach it and just ban people from selling certain sorts of drinks. Say you just not tax it, but say you're simply not allowed to sell them with that amount of sugar. I think my preference, and I think that generally the Mark and Pete preference, is not to introduce new laws and regulations. That's the last thing we want. So I think, taking on your point about education, it's about education, and it's about, in the culture, there being the idea that you want to be fit and healthy. And this, I think, is where the changes currently in culture could save us, in that the current enthusiasm for running and exercise, which is a certain subculture within our society, in which some people are really, really fit and love going running up mountains, and the current trend is to then have coloured powder blown over them as they're running.
Yes.
One of the latest trends. But the on the other side of the equation, we have people who just sit on the sofa playing video games all day and drinking sugary drinks. So the question is, can we support and encourage the fitness side to win? You know, people want to run in marathons. They want to run up mountains. They want to go on runs through mud and coloured paint and enjoy themselves and be fit. Then they don't want these sugary drinks. You know, so therefore they won't be bought. They won't be.
Well, of course. And I wonder how much exercise our own Chancellor of the Exchequer does, because, lead by example. I don't see our current Chancellor running around the streets, but then maybe that's not a priority. It's perhaps balancing the books. But coming back to the point of balancing your diet, because the National Health Service bosses have certainly looked at this very carefully, and what they are considering is introducing a sort of a tax, effectively, either putting more levy on the products that are purchased at hospitals, i.e. through vending machines, or possibly actually even removing them completely, actually not allowing anyone to purchase those type of goods.
Right.
Now, interestingly, ministers have been debating this on what is right for children in particular, as well as adults. But what they have identified, that some children actually consume 3 times as much sugar as they should. Now, that's an astronomical amount for any individual, with a third of that coming primarily from fizzy drinks. So what they've actually done is narrowed it down. We've talked originally about many other products like biscuits and cakes and so on, but actually what they do see as the biggest culprit is fizzy drinks. Now, interestingly, Mexico has actually put levies on, a tax that they introduced of 10%. And they've noticed that the consumption of fizzy drinks fell by 6%. Now, of course, that's a good thing. But is that going to work everywhere? So whilst obviously Mexico have seen some success with that, is it a case of just picking on fizzy drinks, or should we just have a broader approach to this type of taxation?
Yes. Well, I understand the idea that taxation can be effective. And if you're going to go that route, you could use it, yes, for other unhealthy foods, or ones you want people to eat less of. You increase the taxation on that. But I'm much more in favour of having more education, explanation, and encouraging fitness through these great races and events. Encourage people to enjoy being fit, so that having the very occasional sugary drink doesn't affect them. Very occasional, not your regular drink, but rather having your regular drink, one that assists you in your running and your fitness regime and activities and enjoyment. I think that once we go down the route of more regulation and more taxation in order to control things, we're not going to see them removed. We're going to see yet another layer where our freedoms are taken away from us, and we're going to see that the temptation for governments in the taxation side of things to just keep on increasing it, and we need to take it that that we want our bodies to be well. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 19 to 20 says, "Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you've received from God? You are not your own, you were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies." We need people to take pride in their body, to not want to put harmful stuff into them, and to enjoy the taste of products that are not harmful to them. That's the way to go. To encourage people like, for example, Jamie Oliver, who you mentioned earlier, to produce things that are the drinks and foods that, and people like him, of course, that are so tempting, and yet they're tempting you to eat or drink something that's healthy.
Yes. Well, again, there is something more obvious to me in this whole subject matter, which is we're talking about tax. So whether that's the tax on sugar or even butter, and we mentioned salt as well. But actually, isn't that treating the symptom and not the cause? Shouldn't we be looking at really why this situation has occurred? I mean, is it the parents' fault, for example, for allowing their children to be too obese? Is it a lack of education in schools? Who is actually to blame here? And should we not be putting the effort in terms of education at that particular stage?
Yes, well, I think it's a question of education. It's educating the palate to not want too much sugar. You don't want to take it in because you know it's bad for you. You don't want to take it in because actually you don't like things that are too sweet. In other words, reinventing our whole diet by recreating the foods we used to eat, things that didn't contain too much sugar, and changing our lifestyle to include those, such that drinking sugary foods, eating too much fatty stuff, it's just not something that we do. It takes a whole change of culture, but that can start with education. Can start with people taking it on in the media and in art forms. In other episodes, we've pointed out that what goes on in movies, what's encouraged in popular singing, can affect culture for the worse.
Yes.
It can affect culture for the better as well. So that's the route to go down.
Yeah, and I think that for those people who are listening, we're talking about something that is for the United Kingdom, but of course this is a global matter. It affects the United States and many other nations around the world. Interestingly, a lot of independent bodies, like for example the Food Foundation, have issued many documents and reports on what would be the best and healthy guides that families should be following. But listeners, we want your opinion on this. What do you think? I mean, should governments be considering tax on things such as sugar or butter or salt? Or should there be another way of tackling the issue of obesity, whether that's in children or indeed in adults? Why not drop us a line on markandpete.com and fill out the contact form? Let us know. We'll read out your comments on the next show. So join us again next time for more colourful conversations with Mark and Pete.